the whole agenda is to create a one world government where everybody has an RFID chip implanted in them. All money is to be in those chips, right? There'll be no more cash. And this is giving me straight from Rockefeller himself. This is what they want to accomplish.
Page 427, lines 15 through 24. Government mandates program for orders for end of life. The government has a say in how your life ends.
Can a microscopic tag be implanted in a person's body to track his every movement? There's actual discussion about that. You will rule on that, mark my words, before your tenure is over.
Supreme Court has upheld the individual mandate, essentially affirming that President Obama's health care law is indeed constitutional.
What he said affects all of us. He said something that really hit home about this phenomena of chemtrails.
What is driving the Obama administration's recklessness? Look no further than senior advisor to President Barack Obama, John P. Holdren. Holdren is the author of Ecoscience, the textbook that advocates putting drugs in the water supply to sterilize people, mandatory forced abortions, and a tyrannical eco-fascist dictatorship run by a planetary regime. Under one scenario, a global pandemic wipes out 6 billion people from the year 2041 onwards.
So that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
Within the next 4 years, we will see the emergence of a new international order.
The beginning.
It is a big idea, a new world order. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
The future of Europe and a new world order.
There's a need for a new world order, but it has different characteristics in different parts of the world.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Follow me.
How much gold is there on Earth? Estimates about how much gold people have mined over the years vary drastically, from around 155,000 metric tons, enough to make a 67-foot cube, to 2.5 million metric tons. That's enough to make a 166-foot large cube entirely out of gold. Why are there such disparities in the estimates? Humans have mined gold for approximately 6,000 years. But reports of how much gold has surfaced and made its way onto the market are skewed by many variables like illegal mining and the reliability of historical precedents on the figure.
Convertibility had been restored in Europe in 1959, and almost immediately thereafter, the United States began running enormous balance of payments deficits, year in and year out. Bretton Woods established an arrangement whereby, supposedly from 1945 and the end of the war onward, all currencies were convertible to the dollar and the dollar to gold. At that time, gold reserves were the final mechanism for settling balance of payments deficits. But Bretton Woods forestalled this process by permitting the sole reserve currency, the main reserve currency, to be considered as official reserves for foreign central banks, such that they could settle all their deficits in dollars as opposed to gold. That's the fundamental difference between the classical gold standard and what is called the gold exchange standard, which Bretton Woods enshrined in law and in treaty. When we were spending more money abroad than we were taking in, all the foreign countries, especially in Europe and in Japan, absorbed these dollars, pouring into their economies, and they held them in their reserves. They immediately take those dollars and reinvest them in the New York money market. Thus, the Americans, I should say the American government, were able to buy abroad and buy at home at the same time. And gradually this vast foreign exchange component built up as a claim against gold. And in 1971, both Britain and several other countries decided to encash their huge accumulations of dollar reserves under the Bretton Woods system for gold. And of course, President Nixon, in his own way, decided to trump them.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. In full cooperation with the International Monetary Fund and those who trade with us, we will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system. Stability and equal treatment is in everybody's best interest.
In 1973, President Nixon asked King Faisal of Saudi Arabia to accept only US dollars as payment for oil and to invest any excess profits in US Treasury bonds, notes, and bills. In return, Nixon offered military protection for Saudi oil fields. The same offer was extended to each of the world's key oil-producing countries, and by 1975, every member of OPEC had agreed to only sell their oil in US dollars. The act of moving the dollar off of gold and tying it to foreign oil instantly forced every oil-importing country in the world to start maintaining a constant supply of Federal Reserve paper. And in order to get that paper, they would have to send real physical goods to America. This was the birth of the petrodollar.
In 2000, Saddam Hussein announced Iraqi oil would be traded in euros, not dollars. Sanctions and an invasion followed.
If Gaddafi had an intent to try to reprice his oil or whatever else the country was selling in the global markets and accept something else as a currency, or maybe launch a gold dinar currency, any move such as that would certainly not be welcomed by the power elite today who are responsible for controlling the world's central banks. So yes, that would certainly be something that would cause his immediate dismissal and the need for other reasons to be brought forth for removing him from power.
Everyone at some point in their lives has heard of the Federal Reserve, but most likely don't understand what it is or how it works. The Federal Reserve, referred to as the Fed, is a central bank that many economists refer to as the biggest robbery ever enacted on the American people. The reason for this is because the Federal Reserve is neither part of the federal government nor does it have any reserves. Yet, this single organization controls the money supply of the most powerful country in the world. The Fed is very diligent in hiding the fact that they are not part of the government. The last thing they want the American people to fully understand is that our government does not control our own money. In order to achieve this, they were very clever and decided to call their institution the Federal Reserve. And by labeling themselves this way, the general public never thought twice about who was in control of the country's money supply. If the Federal Reserve is not part of the government, then who controls this private organization and how did this come to be? The answer to this question is what changed the course of our country forever.
Right now, you know, Ron Paul probably would have more support if people understood
more about the Federal Reserve System. When he started to speak about it early in his campaign, most people were saying, huh, what's all that about? But because of the internet and because of the distribution of so much material on the Federal Reserve System, including my book, which probably played a small part in that, there was a substantial number of people who did understand that, hey, wait a minute, the Federal Reserve System isn't a government agency, it's a cartel, it's a banking cartel, and it's working against the public interest. So when there was enough people that could say that and understand what they were talking about, all of a sudden the momentum began to move toward Ron Paul instead of away from him. Yes, people still said, I don't know what he's talking about, but more and more people were saying, I do know what he's talking about, and he's right on target. And you reach a critical mass with that. When enough people start saying, yes, yes, he's right, then the others who don't know anything are listening, say, what are they talking about? And now they take an interest. So I think that we're almost at the point now of this tipping point or the critical mass where people do understand the scam behind the Federal Reserve System. I think if Ron Paul and other candidates would just continue emphasizing this issue alone, I think it could make the difference. It could be the difference between recapturing the country and not doing so.
The Federal Reserve is poison to our country. Of course it is. It's poison. Whoever makes the money makes the rules. Rothschild said that. And they make the money. Why are we allowing these private bankers to make the money for our country? It makes no sense. Why are we paying interest to these banks to make money for us when the government can do it itself without paying interest and without all that debt? There's no answer to that question, and it's the question no politician will raise. Everybody talks about America's debt, how much debt we're in. We're in debt because we have to borrow money. But we don't have to borrow money.
They designed it so we go into debt.
Exactly. We can create the money and back it by gold so they can't create too much of it. So you don't have the inflation. And do what the founding fathers gave us. But instead, the bankers make the money, they control the government, they buy the politicians, they tell us who gets into office. You have computer voting, that's a fraud. They do whatever they want to do to us. They do whatever they want to do to us. And it has to stop.
what you want to do. Bring me down, can't none bring me down. Your love is too high to bring me down, can't none bring me down. I said, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
And then Syria.
We had a chance to talk about a wide range of international issues, including the situation in Syria. And I have to say that all of us who've been seeing the terrible pictures coming out of Syria and Homs recently recognize it is absolutely imperative for the international community to rally and send a clear message to President Assad that it is time for a transition. It is time for that regime to move on, and it is time to stop the killing of Syrian citizens by their own government.
Lebanon.
They both had different reasons, the State Department and the White House, for wanting Israel to do it, encouraging them to do it, and supporting them. Our Air Force worked very closely with the Israeli Air Force for months before this, not necessarily with a deadline, knowing when it would happen. It was always going to be whenever there was an incident, they would take advantage of an incident. The word I used was fortunate timing. When Hezbollah grabbed some of the Israeli soldiers in early July, that was then a pretext, I think that's the only word, for a major offensive that had been in the works a long time.
Libya.
Today we can definitively say that the Gaddafi regime has come to an end. The last major regime strongholds have fallen. The new government is consolidating the control over the country, and one of the world's longest-serving dictators is no more.
Somalia.
Well, violence isn't only on the rise in Afghanistan. In fact, it looks like America's shadow wars have now increased by one. Drone strikes have long been reported in Pakistan and Yemen, but now there's news that a week ago, a U.S. drone aircraft fired on 2 leaders of the Somalian organization Al-Shabaab.
Sudan.
President Obama is sending 100 combat-equipped troops to Central Africa to advise local forces on getting rid of one of the continent's most vicious operatives, Joseph Kony, the head of the Lord's Resistance Army, a group responsible for atrocities across the region. It's the first open deployment of U.S. ground combat power to Africa since the Black Hawk Down incident in Somalia in the 1990s that killed 18 troops. U.S. troops may wind up now in Uganda, South Sudan, the Central African Republic, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's part of a growing military effort to engage in Africa.
Finishing off Iran.
It turns out that banks actually have about 9 times as much money loaned out as they have on reserve in their vaults. This is possible because of what's referred to as fractional reserve lending. The way it works is that the Federal Reserve, or the central bank in any country, is legally allowed to determine the amount a bank must have on reserve. In the US, it's currently around 10%. So if you deposit $10,000 into the bank sets aside 10%, or $1,000, and then loans out the rest of your money. The way it works is, say another person comes into the bank and asks for a car loan of $9,000. At this moment, the bank loans out the $9,000 from your original deposit. It isn't there anymore. The borrower then pays the person selling the car, and they go deposit the money into another bank, which is part of the same central banking system. This $9,000 is treated as a new deposit, and the process continues. The money gets redeposited and reloaned until the initial deposit of $10,000 becomes $100,000. The banking system just created $90,000 by loaning out your money.
What we're talking about here are 2 main kinds. There are the exchange-traded derivatives. Here in the United States, they go across the Chicago Mercantile Exchange or the Chicago Board Options Exchange. In London, you have the London ICE Exchange, you have the London LIFI and its descendants. So here we're talking about futures, options, and indices, and also all the combinations of those. Those are exchange traded. It's estimated that the value of those, so-called the price of those at any given time, is about 700 trillion, 800 trillion, 900 trillion US dollars. But then there's a whole other dimension, which are the so-called over-the-counter derivatives, the swaps sometimes called. These are private contracts between companies, individuals, counterparties. They take place in private offices, and they're thought to be another 700 to 800 trillion in existence at any given time. And nobody knows really how much there are of those, because in most countries of the world, they're not reportable. We have the Dodd-Frank Act here in the United States, which is supposed to begin making them reportable and known, but they're very pessimistic that that's going to happen. So I would say in today's world, we've probably got between 1.5 quadrillion total derivatives, but they're always being bought and sold. So when we talk about turnover, the sales every year, we're probably in the neighborhood of 6 quadrillion, 7 quadrillion, 8 quadrillion. And
You see, the money that they create for the federal government eventually winds up in somebody's pocket. Let's say it winds up in the pocket of the postman that delivers your mail. And he deposits that into his checking account. And that's in a commercial bank down the street. Now it's out of the government cycle and it's into the private banking cycle. And that's where the action really is. People don't look at that generally. Now the local bank, if the local banker gets a $1,000 deposit from the postman, did you know he can loan up to $9,000 to you and still have $1,000 in reserve? The original 1,000 is called a reserve, and the Federal Reserve Act or cartel agreement says commercial banks can take their reserves and multiply them by 10 to 1 and loan out what they just created by that X factor. So they create money out of nothing and loan it to you and me at interest. Interest on nothing. Not too bad.
The following chart will compare the value of 5 money systems at June 30, 2015. First, the Bitcoin, which has a value of approximately $3 billion. Second, all gold in the world, which has a value of approximately $6,500 billion. Third, M0 money in the world, which has a value of approximately $29,000 billion. Fourth, M2 or M3 money in the world, which has a reported value of approximately 88,000 billion, or $88 trillion. Fifth, derivatives, which has a value of approximately 1,500,000 billion, or $1,500 trillion. The total money supply M3 and derivatives is estimated at $1,600 trillion, what is approximately more than 246 times the total value of gold, and what is rounded 533,000 times the value of the Bitcoin. Neither gold nor the Bitcoin will become a replacement for the present money system.
Stricken, poverty-ridden planet. You are safe. Help is on the way. Your prosperity is the core objective of our universal design. The path for humanity has spanned throughout ages to ensure the survival and prosperity of the human species. War is a liar who claims there isn't enough land, isn't enough wealth, isn't enough food for all people, in all places, to live in abundance. A different age is upon us. Fear not, for for the bursting sounds that echo across your red horizons. Prepare your life for the light that grows steadily brighter in the distance. As the dawn comes to rid your battlefields of darkness, the age of Illuminatium will begin. Fear nothing. We are always watching out for you. To find out more about our organization and your part in the universal design, visit Illuminati.am.
So
The Rothschilds bought Reuters in the 1800s. Reuters then bought the Associated Press, which selects and delivers the same news stories to the entire world, day after day. They have controlling interest in 3 major television networks and easily avoid media attention since they own it.
I've been speaking about the Rockefeller Foundation. I was mentioning the fact that in the United States, the Rockefeller Foundation, which also runs, I think it is the Carnegie Foundation today, maybe even the Ford, they're all combined. The families that are given the intergenerational rights, if you like, or authority to lead the world to amalgamation under global governance. Mr. Rockefeller also is heavily involved in the world depopulation strategies. He funds abortion clinics across the planet. He also funds hundreds of other front foundations that you would think were independent from his, but they're actually front foundations. He funds them all through his money. You can trace them all back again to so-called family planning clinics across the entire globe, especially in the third world countries. It seems that Mr. Rockefeller is intensely worried about overpopulation in the near future from countries which will have no industry, etc. And he sees it as his right to start the decimating process, basically, of depopulation. Last winter, I got an invitation to attend something called the World's Citizenship Council, the annual meeting. That kind of floored me because the head of the World Citizenship Council is Mr. Rockefeller himself. And here I am speaking out about and against them. So this did not come out of the blue. They try and get you on board working for them. Lord Bertrand Russell said in one of his own books, the same book, in fact, where he talks about those children who manage to escape the indoctrinations, who have intelligence and an ability to communicate to others, must be brought on board the system, employed by the system, bribed into the system if possible. That generally works with most people. He said, otherwise we shall have to eliminate them, because they did not want people around who understood an agenda that the general public are unaware of. Didn't want these people with the ability to communicate information, documented information, in a fashion that people understand out in the community where they could spread this word. That ties in with Mao Zedong, who said he was not afraid of armies. His worst fear was someone with a good idea, a great idea, a unique idea, and the ability to communicate it. So that is how they treat basically people with information. First comes invitation to join them. Many people do. As I say, Bertrand Russell backed that up by saying if they can't be brought on board, they must be literally eliminated from the public arena. That's how seriously they take this agenda at the top. They don't mess it around. The reason I think they don't simply come out and kill you straightforward is they don't have to do a messy job. There's many ways of killing you, especially in this day and age. But I think, to be honest, they're so arrogant right now at this moment. They're not too worried about the mass of the general population who are indoctrinated and updated with their indoctrination daily from television, as one example.
August 2013, and NATO leaders can't get the public on side for the imminent bombing of Syria. Suddenly, the BBC says it was filming a small rural hospital, and a game-changing atrocity happens right there, the moment they were filming.
Last month, we were filming the doctors working at this hospital when victims of an incendiary bomb attack on a school playground started pouring in.
Absolute chaos and carnage here. It must be some sort of napalm.
But a highly sceptical public stayed hostile to military intervention. Exactly 1 month later, the leaders are trying to pin a chemical weapons attack on Syria without success. The BBC airs exactly the same footage but digitally alters the word napalm for, quote, chemical weapons, hoping no one will notice.
Absolute chaos and carnage here. It must be some sort of chemical weapon.
Not only did folks notice, but it unleashed a massive public investigation, which made some extremely disturbing findings.
This is the total fabrication. From beginning to end of an atrocity with BBC reporter Ian Pannell standing amidst a tableau of very bad actors. This is completely beyond the pale.
This audio analysis by media investigator Robin Upton shows both versions are identical and from the same speech. The BBC then digitally altered the words from napalm to chemical weapon, the exact justification NATO was finding difficult to prove. That game-changing allegation was made by two doctors that had travelled with the BBC, who claimed the number of sudden casualties is, quote, overwhelming. What kind of doctor, notes media investigator Robert Stewart, gives interviews when she is surrounded by supposedly seriously burned and dying teenagers?
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
Well, a child's happiness is priceless, right? Especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday. A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on their birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially when it comes to their birthday.
Absolutely.
A child's happiness is... A child's happiness is...
Well, a child's happiness is...
A child's smile is priceless.
A child's happiness is...
You know, a child's happiness is...
A child's happiness is...
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday.
A child's happiness is priceless.
David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do ya? Well, it goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 well, your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty and the moonlight overthrew ya. She tied you to her kitchen chair, she broke your throne and she cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the hallelujah, Maybe I've been here before. I've seen this room and I've walked this floor. I used to live alone.
At least a UK military intervention seems unlikely. Why are we doing this outside? Well, because it's cold and it's starting to rain and we can easily do it from a studio. I'm just wondering what... Yeah, well, that's very easy for you to say in your ivory tower. I'm just wondering... Really? Really? Okay, do you hear what he just said? Do you hear what he just said, why don't you, for once in your life, just do the fucking news? All right, no, I'm gonna do the fucking news. No, here is the fucking news. Ex-commercial TV PR man, old Etonian and occasional pig fucker David Cameron would like to bomb Syria. Unfortunately, Russia's got there first, and America's been doing it for ages. He wants to bomb Syria to stop the flow of refugees fleeing all the bombs. He's also hoping it will stop the increased influence of Islamic extremism. Bombing Syria will of course destroy the one remaining multicultural society in the region, leaving it open to the increased influence of Islamic extremism. To bomb Syria, therefore, is clearly mental. In other news, I'm doing the fucking news. In other news, Muslims are bad, China's bad, but not as bad as it used to be, and Russia is always bad. Nuclear weapons are good, and to suggest not using nuclear weapons is bad. Onto the economy. Debt is good. Corrupt banks are bad, but not bad enough for us to do anything about them. And poverty in the UK is a figment of your imagination. Onto housing. Jeremy Corbyn's plans to build affordable housing and create social housing for the poorest people in our society is a terrible idea. That's according to multi-millionaire, property magnate and all-round shitpot Sir Alan Sugar. Environmental news, there's nothing to worry about, so please carry on consuming at your usual rate. And finally tonight, entertainment. Matt Damon's intelligent and articulate observations about sexuality in Hollywood means that he is definitely a homophobic twat. My name is Jonathan Pye, and that was the fucking news!
Well, I've been a journalist for about 25 years, and I was educated to lie, to betray, and not to tell the truth to the public. But seeing right now, within the last months, how the German and American media tries to bring war to the people in Europe, to bring war to Russia. This is a point of no return, and I'm going to stand up and say it is not right what I have done in the past, to manipulate people, to make propaganda against Russia, and it is not right what my colleagues do and have done in the past, because they are bribed to betray the people, not only in Germany, all over Europe. The reason writing this book was that I am very fearful of a new war in Europe, and I don't like to have this situation again, because war is never coming from itself. There is always people behind it to push for war. And this is not only politicians, this is journalists too. And I just have written in the book how we have betrayed in the past our readers, just to push for war, and because I don't want this anymore. I'm fed up with this propaganda. We live in a banana republic and not in a democratic country where we have press freedom, where we have human rights.
important is to understand that the foundation of the present money system is oil, and that it is a scam. Peak oil starts the end of this paradigm. In the following part of the documentary you see that the focus therefore becomes to reduce the world population to 500 million, and to replace the present petrodollar by a sterile Monsanto seed dollar and RFID matrix. The main tool for establishing the new matrix are the chemtrails, polluting the soil so that only sterile Monsanto seed will grow. The following part of this documentary is very confrontational. You will become aware that it is the biggest crime against humanity, which is executed at this very moment. On the end of this documentary we provide an excellent solution.
I've been interested in oil for some time, and we had a project outlined, and we'd figured out where we were going to go, and we knew that it was going to be about oil depletion and then depletion of other resources, and also what are the alternatives. If we know that the status quo doesn't work, where are we going? So I had a very abstract sense of what I was doing, but I hadn't yet kind of felt it. And I'd been listening to people talk about depletion, for example, how fields rise and fall, and the sort of the technical aspect of it. But again, it was abstract, And it was sort of like, I think, the typical journalist's disease, which is you don't ever believe anything you're writing. You couldn't. It's all just, you're a fiction writer. You just don't call yourself a fiction writer. It happens to be true what you're writing, but you haven't quite bought it yet. And because you maintain this journalistic distance from your topic, as you should. And I'm standing out there in the middle of the desert with the Saudis, and the guys finally said, they told me that the world's biggest oil field, was filling up with water. And it was just to have them say that. It just struck me. I just remember I was just standing there in the desert, beautiful. It was a beautiful evening. The sun's gone down. The sky is that dark blue. The sand is red. It's like it's like out of a movie. You're sitting there, and it's perfect. And they're talking about an oil field. We're visiting a field called Sheba, which they're quite proud of. It's a brand new field they just started producing from. And Gawar, the big oil field, the world's biggest, is it's some ways away. And I just we've been talking about Sheba, and I just asked them casually about Gawar, and they from kind of a competitive sense, these engineers, they said, oh, he's asking about Gawar again. They were really kind of disappointed because they're tired of answering questions about Gawar, and they were feeling kind of catty, and they said, oh, Gawar, it's filling with water, and they're just kind of like, oops, and they said the water cut was 30%, right? Which meant 30% of the fluids coming out are water, and there was this moment of silence, and I think it wasn't like a state secret, but I think they're going, well, we probably shouldn't have said that. But meanwhile, I was thinking I got this chill that ran through my body. The hairs actually went up on the back of my neck because it was the first time that someone had said, and just for a second I thought, wow, what if this is all true?
We are almost absolutely, totally dependent on oil for all of our activities. First of all, industry, of course, runs on oil. Everyone understands that. Agriculture, modern mechanized agriculture to feed the world. The evidence for peak oil is absolutely overwhelming. First of all, we're discovering less and less new oil fields. Virtually 4/5 of the oil that we're now consuming comes from fields discovered before 1970. The opportunity to find new oil becomes limited to smaller and smaller pockets, which are more difficult to extract and more costly. We are now consuming each year 3 times more than the extra oil that we're discovering. And that gap is widening. I think the general consensus, probably within the oil industry itself, although they're very unwilling to say this publicly, but the academic researchers who are much more likely to be independent and hard-headed in their analysis outside the oil industry believe that peak oil probably in the area of a 2010-2015. something like that. And after that, we begin to see a gradual, very slow, gradual reduction in the supply, but an acceleration of demand. That's why this is not alarmist. It is impossible to believe that that will not happen. It is going to happen.
Well, peak oil is probably now very easy to explain, much easier than it was a long time ago. People have felt what $147 a barrel oil feels like. Essentially, peak oil is like, if you know what a bell curve is, goes up, comes down. Peak oil is the point in oil production when you're at the top of the bell curve. And essentially what that means is you've used up half of the resource. But in the case of oil or any other substance like that, no matter how much money you throw at it, you're never going to be able to increase oil production above where it was at peak. As of 2008, the International Energy Agency has admitted that there is a global 9% decline rate in oil production. That's the equivalent of about 8 million barrels a day. There is no way, having plucked all the low-hanging fruit and found the big reservoirs, that we're going to be able to offset a 9% decline rate. First of all, if you think there might be oil someplace, then what you do is you go drill a test well. Then what you have to do is to take that one well in the center and then you drill a series of appraisal wells around that well to determine where the oil field might go. You don't know how much oil you're going to get, how deep it is, what kind of oil it's going to be. There are many different grades of oils, a lot of which are more expensive to refine. So all of that has to do with how long it takes to make something produce. How much energy do you get back for how much energy you invested? When oil was seeping out of the ground in Pennsylvania, you got a return of, 200 to 1. When you have to go offshore to deep water, drilling in 15,000 feet of water, and your first well costs $150 million to build, all that's energy that's being invested to get energy. And the moment you start burning more energy to get a barrel of oil out of the ground, then it's worth it. Forget about it. The world's been thoroughly explored over the last 120 years. There's no new major oil finds left. As a matter of fact, no field the size of Ghawar, the largest field in Saudi Arabia, has ever been discovered since. Saudi Arabia has 25% of the known oil reserves on the planet. 25%. Why, if Saudi Arabia has all these untapped reserves onshore, are they moving heavily into offshore drilling? Now, if it's 5, 10, 50 times more expensive to drill offshore than on land, doesn't that tell you that Saudi Arabia knows they've got no more oil to find? It's axiomatic that if Saudi Arabia has passed its peak and is in decline, the whole planet is, just because of the size of the reserves that are there. Let's assume, just for the sake of discussion, that there's 600 billion barrels in the Arctic. First of all, it happens to be under the polar ice cap. That's a problem. The polar ice cap happens to be on, 10, 15,000 feet of water. The problem with the polar ice cap is it floats, it moves. So you can't drill a well on Tuesday and expect it to be in the same place on Thursday. That's why a lot of conservative think tanks and oil companies are cheering the melting of the polar ice caps.
Well, the project for a new America Century is a think tank. It's a very pretty extreme right-wing think tank, and it drafted a document in September 2000 in the course of the presidential election campaign for Bush, which is called Strengthening America's Defenses. and it makes very interesting reading. It's pretty chilling. It talks in regard to the Middle East about how the flow of oil into the international markets had been interrupted by Saddam Hussein's regime, and that it was necessary to remove that, and if necessary by military means. Don't forget, this was written in September 2000. That is a year before 9/11 and 3 years before the Iraq War. It also says, very significantly, that even if Saddam Hussein were removed from the scene, it would still be necessary to take this action in the Middle East. So the American motive is revealed by this not to be antagonism to Saddam Hussein, because who we all know is a brutal, sadistic tyrant, but it is not the human rights issues or the justice issues. It is the fact that he stood in the way of American control over oil. He used it for his interests, not the Americans' interests, and that was not acceptable to the US.
RIG's investment is from $500 million up to $3 billion. Due to the high investment cost and high cost of operation on open sea, the rigs are normally limited and only used when no or limited oil is found on shore. In the OPEC Annual Statistical Bulletin of 2009 on page 25, the number of rigs for the year 2009 for OPEC countries was shown at 300. The OPEC Annual Statistical Bulletin of 2015 shows on page 23, for the year 2014 a dramatically increase from 300 towards 855. What is an increase of 185%? In the OPEC Annual Statistical Bulletin of 2009 on page 25, the number of rigs for the year 2009 for the total world was shown at 2,632. The OPEC Annual Statistical Bulletin of 2015 shows on page 23, for the year 2014 a dramatically increase from 2,632 towards 5,197. What is an increase of 97%? In OPEC, the top increase in rigs was performed by Venezuela with 172, Saudi Arabia with 78, Iran with 83, Iraq with 39, Kuwait with 28, United Arab Emirates with 19, Libya 15, Nigeria with 38, Angola 32, and Ecuador with 31 rigs. Looking at this rig increase percentage-wise, Venezuela has a 351% increase, Saudi Arabia 116%, Iran 159%, Iraq 130%, Kuwait 165%, United Arab Emirates 173%, Libya 94%, Nigeria 475%, Angola 640% and Ecuador 310% increase. The major increase in rigs in the world was by OPEC, with 555 rigs, United States 709 rigs and China with an increase higher than USA and OPEC, with 780 rigs. Percentage-wise, the most important increase was OPEC with 185%, USA with 60.5% and China with an astonishing expansion of 1,814%. To understand peak oil, we will analyze 6 indicators, which can be found in the OPEC Annual Statistical Bulletin 2009 and in the Bulletin of 2015. We look at the following 6 publications. World production of crude oil. Wells completed in OPEC members. Active rigs in OPEC members. Producing wells in OPEC members. World proven crude oil reserves. And lastly, at cumulative production of crude oil. To understand the oil situation in Saudi Arabia, we have made 5 charts to see the progress over the year 1996 to 2014. Daily production of crude oil peaked in 2005 at 9,353 barrels per day, dropped to 8,165 by year 2010 and rose again towards 9,713 barrels in 2014. The number of wells completed increased from 373 in the year 2005 towards 538 for the year 2014. The active rigs increased from 44 in 2005 towards 145 in 2014. This means that the production increase after 2005 was created by increased active rigs. The number of producing wells increased from 1,885 in 2005 towards 3,406 in 2014. The average daily production per well dropped from 5,000 in the year 2005 towards 3,300 in 2008, spiked in 2009 and dropped even lower towards 2,800 barrels per well per day in 2010. Following are 4 percentage charts. The number of rigs increased from 100% in 2005 towards 330% in 2014. The number of producing wells increased from 100% in 2005 towards 181% in 2014. The number of wells completed increased towards 144%. The daily production, however, declined towards 87% in 2010 and rose back very little towards 104% in 2014. Lastly, we look at the balance of the proven crude oil reserves. The proven crude oil reserves of Saudi Arabia is shown in 1998 260 billion barrels and increased in 2005 towards 264 billion barrels. The cumulative crude oil production of Saudi Arabia is shown at 136 billion barrels in 2014. Saudi Arabia has a cumulative crude oil production of 51.2% of its proven oil reserves. This means a balance of 48.8%. This, with all the other facts, leads towards the conclusion that Saudi Arabia has passed peak oil.
Now, before we start talking about false flag terrorism, I want to take you to a piece that was put together by our very own John Bound. He's a very talented writer and producer here at Infowars.com, and he's going to educate us on the Hegelian dialectic, and he's focusing on the psychology behind government-sponsored terrorism.
The global banking cartel has used one tried and true process to create wars, rob us of our currency, and eat away at our substance. This process of control over the masses is called the Hegelian dialectic. So what is it, and how is it being used today? German philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel devised a dialectic, or method to resolve a disagreement between outcomes. The dialectic is made up of three attributes: thesis, an idea or opinion; antithesis, the opposite idea or opinion; and synthesis, the alchemic process to bring together a wanted change. It is commonly referred to as order out of chaos, and is waged against the masses in many forms. Saul Alinsky, self-avowed Marxist, proponent of the Hegelian dialectic, published this in Rules for Radicals. Any revolutionary change must be preceded by a passive, affirmative, non-challenging attitude toward change among the mass of our people. They must feel so frustrated, so defeated, so lost, so futureless in the prevailing system that they are willing to let go of the past and chance the future. George Bush became the hero of 9/11 simply due to the fact that he was the president, and then rammed through legislation that threatened our liberties as we all complacently stood by and allowed it to happen. A manufactured crisis occurs, thesis. George Bush answers it by rallying public opinion and becoming the host of the tragedy, antithesis, thus owning the crisis through synthesis. Equilibrium is attained. All of the once separate parts of the plan are joined together. In this example, the Patriot Act acting as the equilibrium on the desired road to tyrannical fascism in America.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition of, it's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here. Will be for an elite with a highly trained bureaucracy underneath them and scientific elite who will not need the human labor that they've needed in the past. Human labor that is excessive and is unemployed and is hungry is now a threat to that established elite. So now they're doing something which they can only do to the human species. They don't need to do this with animals. With animals, just go out and hunt them and kill them. We are the only species that has to be convinced to allow ourselves, for the good of all, to be sterilized and bring down the population through abortion on one end and euthanasia on the other, under the guise to save the planet. And unfortunately, with the massive propaganda campaigns that are all over media in every country at the same time, with all the big foundations backing them with unlimited financing. Remember, the foundations are owned by the international bankers themselves. Then they can pull all of this off, and unfortunately it really is working. In kindergarten now, you walk into a kindergarten anywhere in Europe or Americas, and you'll see the rainbow inside every single one of them. You'll see all the terms about the world. Here's the globe, we're all global. And you'll see the greening messages everywhere, everywhere. And how sacrifice will have to be made to save the world and the planet and future generations of society. Sacrifice. You tie that together with the institutions that were comprised of the Fabian Society. It was a member of the Royal Institute for International Affairs. That's one society. The Council on Foreign Relations is also the same thing as the Royal Institute for International Affairs. They are what Thatcher and Professor Carroll Quigley called the parallel government. They have told us what the future is going to be. Some of their members have even written books about the need to cull off massive amounts of the population by any means possible. And so we see this final stage being pushed as they convince us that we are the problem. The Club of Rome, that also belongs to the same group, in the 1990s, the two founders said that back in the 1970s at the Club of Rome, they were given the task as a premier think tank for the globe, for this global society, the task to find ways of reducing the population and controlling the people to go along with this, convincing the public how to go along with it. And they said they looked at all possible means of doing so. What had worked before? Again, geopolitics, strategy. Under warfare conditions, the public will give up freedom. The public will be directed by governments, bureaucracies, and police, military, etc. Under warfare, the public sacrifice. They'll have less food, they'll ration stuff. They go along with it to save themselves. Therefore, they'd have to find a warfare strategy, a reason for war. And what they came up with was that man was the enemy of the planet. They said that the idea that global warming could be created and blamed upon mankind would fit the bill. These are the words they used. That would fit the bill, written in the 1970s, and decided at the think tanks then, and published by the guys involved in a book called The First Global Revolution. Well worth reading.
panel. Lord Christopher Monckton, former science advisor to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, expert on this issue. They're frightened to take you on, generally. Al Gore, will he debate you?
He won't. We advertised right across America for months in all the major newspapers saying, come on, Al, baby, I'm waiting. And he would not even give us an answer. He was terrified. Of course, his speaker's contract specifies not only his usual $300,000 fee.
Good
and you're not even paying me half of that.
No,
to be
no,
honest.
not even. But you do get some coffee.
But yeah, we get some coffee. But $300,000. On top of that, he will not take any unscripted question. He will not be interviewed by anyone from the media unless his staff have cleared them first. And the only ones they clear are so dumb and sycophantic that they will only ask questions that he can answer, which isn't very many of them, like, what's your name? Anything beyond that, and he's foxed. So, of course, he won't debate with me. Right. Here is why there is no point, economically speaking, in doing anything to curb our carbon emissions, even if, as we now know, in fact, the UN is wrong. But let's pretend it's right.
Okay.
Here's why nothing will work. We burn 30 billion tons a year of CO2 worldwide. All right? 30 billion tons a year. Now, that is the equivalent of 2 parts per million per year in the atmosphere. So that's 15 billion tons per part per million, all right? Are you with us so far?
Not really, but I'll pretend, yes.
Good, right, that's very simple. 30 divided by 2, 15 billion, okay.
Got it.
With us so far. Now, the UN says we're going to increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, unless we do anything about it, by 468 parts per million in the next century. 468 ppmv. So that means, if you multiply that by that, you get 7 trillion tons we're going to emit of CO2 if we don't do any mitigation over the next century. 7 trillion tons. Okay. Now, they say that those 7 trillion tons are going to cause 7 Fahrenheit of warming in the next century. That's wrong, but that's what they say. That means that in order to forestall 1 Fahrenheit degree of warming, you have to forego the emission of 1 trillion tons of CO2. Now, divide 1 trillion tons by the number of tons, the 30 billion tons per year that we started with, that we're burning at the moment worldwide, and how many years is it going to take before we have saved 1 Fahrenheit degree? Come along, Bolton.
Yeah, no, I won't be alive.
Neither of you can work this out. It's 33 years for 1 Fahrenheit degree. Now, 33 years means no automobiles anywhere on the planet, no electricity, no planes, no trains, no hospitals, no factories, no carbon emissions at all for 33 years, just for 1 Fahrenheit degree. That is why it is absolutely no point trying to mitigate carbon emissions. It makes not the slightest difference to the climate. End of lesson.
All right.
Well, thank you very much. You've been with the Christopher Monckton Hour. Now, what I'd like to say to Al Gore is this. Al, baby, if you really believe that you want to raise...
Look right here. Look right there. Tell him right there.
Yeah, Al, baby, if you really think that you want to raise the profile of this issue, then why don't you agree to debate with me on international television? The fees we'll earn, apart from anything else, would be enormous, and I know you'd love that, because money seems to stick to you very rapidly. I want you to face me in a debate about global warming, and if you don't dare, I want you to remain silent about that subject forever from now on. Are you a coward, or will you step up to the plate? Are you an armchair quarterback, or are you going to get suited up and get onto that field?
Of Reason Award to Art Robinson. Art Robinson is the reason many of us are in this room. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be here. Way back, 1997, 1998, when the Kyoto Protocol was first being proposed, Art Robinson was one of those pioneers who saw that the science had been hijacked by the left, that people were being lied to, and that real scientists all across the country, all across the world, were being ignored. That the fact that most scientists didn't believe that climate change was either man-made or was going to be a problem was being ignored and hidden by a small group of politically oriented scientists. So Dr. Robinson didn't just sit on the sidelines. He made a critical decision. He said, let's organize a petition that we can ask scientists to sign that says that we don't believe global warming is a crisis. And he hatched the petition project. It's a very short statement, and I'm going to read it to you in full. It says, we urge the United States government to reject the global warming agreement that was written in Kyoto, Japan in December 1997, and any other similar proposals. The proposed limits on greenhouse gases would harm the environment, hinder the advance of science and technology, and damage the health and welfare of mankind. There is no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing or will in the foreseeable future cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of Earth's climate. Moreover, there is substantial scientific evidence that increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide produce many beneficial effects upon the natural plant and animal environments of the Earth. Period. Signed by 31,000 scientists, over 9,000 of whom have PhDs. It's a brilliant thing, and it's so important in the debate to be able to say, look, the only petition that's been signed by that many scientists is adamant that the science is not in and that global warming is not a crisis, which is why the left demonizes that petition just relentlessly. If you go to the Wikipedia entry on it, you'll see how they try to misrepresent it. So Dr. Robinson is a distinguished chemist. He's the co-founder of the Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine. He's the editor of Access to Energy, an outstanding newsletter on energy policy and environmental issues. He received a PhD in chemistry from the University of California in San Diego. I'll say quickly, the Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine, founded in 1981, is a nonprofit research organization devoted to conducting basic and applied research in subjects immediately applicable to increasing the quality, quantity, and length of human life. And one word about Access to Energy, go online, look it up, sign up for it, because it's a delightful thing to be able to read. Art says of his readers and his editorial philosophy, we don't ask them to trust and parrot us, we ask them to think, which I think is absolutely perfect.
So not only do we have the pollution, not only do we have stunted growth, but we also have changes in weather. And it's been severe changes in weather all across the globe.
I don't have a clue how bad they are, but I know they are affecting already in certain plants, you know, like basil, cilantro, and sometimes the broccoli gets too much fungus. It can be from those things because no matter what we do, it doesn't fit. It's not working right.
It appears to be a fungally related ailment, and if one looks at the species extinction rate,
which today is estimated to be 1,000 times natural variability. That's 1,000 times normal, a figure you'd think would alarm most reasonable people, which is 100,000% of normal. And 70 to 80% of that extinction, plant and animal, is related to fungal infection. Geoengineering particulates are known to proliferate fungal reproduction.
Abiotic stresses are drought, cold, heavy metals, excess moisture in the soil. And Monsanto has a patent that actually addresses all of those abiotic stresses. And the plants that it addresses is everything from apples to zucchini. The Midwest grows 40% of the world's corn. And it does have a tendency to flood, so we can expect more and more flooding. According to the statistics, the EPA statistics say that there's going to be more and more flooding.
Monsanto is one of the world's largest chemical companies. They also own 90% of the seed companies in the world right now, and they are the largest company putting out genetically modified seeds.
So what does Monsanto do? Corn is the lead-in because corn is in just about everything. Corn is the main crop. And Monsanto leads in with corn products before it does anything else. So what we have is Monsanto leading in with a drought-resistant corn and an abiotic stress-resistant corn. The drought and the flooding, it's all the same patent. Monsanto has a patent for abiotic stress. Abiotic stress is the drought, it's the flooding, it's the excess soil, it's anything that's going to stress a plant.
GMO is genetically modified organism, and it's also called GE, genetic engineering. Well, the history of farming has been a farmer will plant a seed into the ground. There will be nutrients in the ground that will enable that plant to grow. And then at the end of the growing season, they will take some of the seeds and they will save them for next year, and they'll grow their next crop. But what is going on with the genetically modified seeds is they're what's called terminator seeds. A terminator seed will not produce other seeds. With the terminator seeds, these farmers have to go back to Monsanto every single year and purchase these extremely high-priced seeds. There have been studies outside of the United States showing that genetically modified seeds, the plants that come from them, are extremely harmful to humans and other life on this planet.
Monsanto scientists found bacteria growing in a chemical waste dump near their factory in the presence of Roundup herbicide. Now, Roundup normally kills bacteria. This bacteria was surviving. They said, great, let's put it in the food supply. So they took the gene from the bacterium that allowed it to survive the Roundup and put it into soybeans. And now those Roundup-ready soybeans can be sprayed with Roundup herbicide and they don't die, just all the other plant biodiversity in the ground dies. The active ingredient in Roundup is called glyphosate. Glyphosate was patented in 1964, not as an herbicide, but as a broad-spectrum chelator. It hugs a lot of different minerals that are needed and does not allow the plants to access them. It also destroys some beneficial microorganisms in the soil, which normally provide nutrients to the plant. It also promotes pathogenic organisms in the soil, which then overrun the plant. And so it creates weaker plants, stronger disease, and the disease does the killing. Now, what do the livestock in the United States eat? They eat largely Roundup-ready crops. Roundup-ready soy, corn, cottonseed, canola mash, sugar beet pulp, and soon alfalfa. So a huge percentage of their food intake is Roundup-ready crops. Now remember, Roundup pulls the nutrients out of the crop. It makes them unavailable. So now we have millions of livestock eating nutrient-deficient food. And what do we eat? We eat plants and we eat animals and take their milk. So It turns out it's a perfect storm now, not just for plant disease, but for animal and human disease. When 44,000 secret FDA memos were made public from a lawsuit about the subject of genetic engineering, the director of the Center for Veterinary Medicine made it absolutely clear that GMOs in animal feed had a unique danger. Toxins can bioaccumulate in animals and in their milk. And so if there were toxins in genetically modified feed, then we might have higher levels of those toxins in the animals that eat the feed or in their milk or other products from those animals.
All our food, 90% of Canadian crops, American crops now are produced by genetic modification, or at least they're contaminated with genetically modified corn, genetically modified soybean, genetically modified everything.
95% of all the genetic modifications are done in order to allow the plants to survive more chemicals being sprayed on them and to allow the animals to survive more drugs being put into them. And of course what happens is that when their genes are changed, our genes are changed by consuming them, just as the superweeds and the superbugs are genetically altered by consuming them. The bug eats the plant, its genes change. The animal eats the plant, its genes change. We eat the animal or the plant, our genes change. Our babies' genes change.
President Obama this week signed into law a bill that could have huge consequences on the future of food in the country. The Agricultural Appropriations Bill has been dubbed the Monsanto Protection Act by critics of the agricultural giant. That's because a provision in the law protects genetically modified seed patents from litigation over health risks. So if you get sick, too bad, you can't take it to court. Since being signed into law Tuesday, more than 250,000 people have signed a petition to President Obama. It says the law, quote, is unnecessary and an unprecedented attack on U.S. judicial review. Congress should not be meddling with the judicial review process based solely on the special interest of a handful of companies. Beyond what's in the bill, critics are angry about how it was passed, snuck into a huge agricultural bill without review by a committee. The law only remains in effect for 6 months, but opponents say this is an example of giant corporations trumping the health and safety rights of the average Joe. And that's not the only food news turning stomachs. The FDA is on its way to approving so-called Frankenfish. RT's Margaret Howell has more.
A genetically modified fish with spare parts is inches away from our food supply chain. The FDA is giving General Electric the go-ahead on an application that's been pending now for 2 years. Just what is this so-called Frankenfish anyway? Well, it's the biotech industry's genetically engineered fish that grows twice that of the normal rate of a real fish. That means it goes into the consumer market faster and at higher rates. This lab animal is loaded with questions that science just can't answer. The biggest one, how does this affect the health of somebody who eats it? Here's what we do know. The lab test of only 6 of these fish showed an elevated level of the growth hormone IGH1, which has been linked to breast, colon, and prostate cancer. With the FDA's approval, this would be the first genetically modified animal allowed in the U.S. for consumption. This is important because this fish, it sets the regulatory precedent for every GMO animal after it. Consumer watchdog groups say not so fast. A concern that GE shares with them, this modified fish could escape into the wild, survive, and actually reproduce there. They say that they're only going to create the female salmon for now with 3 sets of DNA instead of the normal 2, rendering the fish infertile in 95% of the cases.
When I saw the State of the Black Union, Dick Gregory
really moved me and a lot of my friends. I show it to everybody that comes over the house, especially white folks, because they need to hear that, you know, so that they know more about all of us. Because what he said affects all of us. He said something that really hit home about this phenomena of chemtrails. And, you know, when I was a kid, I used to see these trails in the sky all the time. And so, oh, that's cool. A jet just went over. And then you started to see a whole bunch of them. And the next thing you know, everybody in your neighborhood was fighting and arguing, and you didn't know why. Okay? And you really didn't know why. I mean, everybody was fighting. So he started riffing about the chemtrails. And he started to say things that hit home so hard. And I would recommend that everybody try to get what he said online or wherever and try to get a copy of it and just listen to it. Because I was so moved that I had to write the song.
And then when you leave, with all the hassle, can you have that love? Love. I'm so tired of you black folk walking around looking all evil like that's gonna change something. Looking all mean and talking all crazy. Let them tell you about your children. If I sit here today, and these are all white folks, and they're putting some sleeping pill in my water, and I sit up here and doze off and go to sleep, and everybody told in the world, niggas is lazy. They tired. No, that's because you too naive enough to know what they putting in my water. Okay? Your children ain't violent because they black. They ain't violent. Most people in the world live in a ghetto. They don't kill people. What are you putting in my malt liquor, white boy? What are you putting in? Huh? Hear me. And it's your fault too. Malt liquor is made by white companies but only sold in black neighborhoods, and you ain't checked it to see what's in it. Huh? How much lead are you putting in my neighborhood? Lead affects my thinking capacity. Lead, there's only one thing on the planet more dangerous than lead, and that's manganese. Manganese will make you kill your mama. And let me tell y'all something. If you want to see the largest homicide rate in the world, it ain't in no black ghetto in America. It's a little town in Australia where them white folks' homicide rate is 200 times what their population is. And that town just happened to be located across the street from a manganese plant. Here you go, right here.
Sit back down, Dick. Don't lose that mic, yeah.
That town is located across the street from a manganese plant. How much manganese are you spraying in my neighborhood at night while I'm asleep? How in the world can a 9-year-old child find a heroin man, but the FBI can't find it, and you gonna tell me that's a black thing? Y'all crazy? What is this about?
I was so moved that I had to write the song. The other thing is the first line of the song says I was born on the same plantation in the United States of the red, white, and blue. And we live in a place now that feels just about like a plantation. We're all indentured servants, you know. When I found out there were 8 presidents before George Washington, I wanted to smack somebody. You know, I wanted to know why I was taught otherwise. Just tell me the whole story. I'll fill in the blanks, but don't, you know, don't tell me something that you think I'm supposed to know.
Jet aircraft pilots and crew and contractors who participate in the chemtrails operation have likely been told that they are helping to mitigate the effects of global warming and climate change or some such. This compartmentalized mission mentality allows good people to do bad things when they don't understand the full consequences of their misrepresented mission.
Chemtrails. Have you seen these yet? They're a little weird. They're perfectly straight. They're literally like a black chemtrail, and then another plane will come along and spray exactly where that black chemtrail points. It literally follows it all the way. And if you have not seen these black chemtrails yet, I'm sure you will, Google it. Check it out. I mean, it's like, what the fuck are these things?
How can there be a shadow if there's nothing there? How can these shadows even exist if there are no chemtrails? How can something that doesn't exist cast a shadow in the middle of the sky and not anywhere else? Have you ever seen this in person? The first time we saw this in person, we were like, nah man, this ain't right. This is freaky. When's the last time you saw a cloud cast a shadow in the sky? This ain't no water vapor. X-shaped clouds aren't natural. We've covered this extensively in the last 2 broadcasts. What you're looking at here, ladies and gentlemen, are death trails.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.